Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome you to this third webinar organized by the Department of Inter-Orthodox, Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. Thank you for joining us for this Greening the Parish initiative that will feature conversations between expert panelists on what it means to be a steward of creation through the lens of Orthodox Christian theology, best practices, and daily action. Before turning to Father John Chrysavgis, I invite you to offer a prayer as we embark on what is one of the most crucial issues of our time, the protection of the natural environment and the Church's response to it. So let us pray, and the text is taken from the Vespers for the preservation of creation. O Lord, who created the universe at the beginning and gave to each thing his own rank, do not despise the works of your hands, but with an eye of mercy look from heaven upon this vine and restore it according to your will, turning aside from it every purpose that brings corruption and every destroyer. For you are our shepherd and deliverer and savior, and from you we receive help in mercy and acts of compassion as we glorify you, O Master. Amen.
Thank you, Father Nicholas. Good evening, everyone. And I wanted to begin by reiterating what I said last week, that His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew conveyed to all of you through me last week his sincere delight that we're offering this program for our parishes and his blessing for the work of these webinars. In this particular webinar this evening, we will hear and learn from those with substantial leadership and experience in reaching out to and transforming communities and churches, and even corporations, both locally and nationally, even internationally. You see, people often think of ecology as just leaves and bees, as flora and fauna, as sun and soil, but it's not just that. It's primarily, predominantly about the social and economic nexus that surrounds them. The truth is that we respond to nature with the same delicacy and tenderness, the very same sensitivity and compassion with which we respond to human beings. If we have learned that we cannot treat people like things, I would propose that we must now begin to learn not to treat even things like mere things, because all of our spiritual activities are measured by their impact on the world, especially on people, especially on the poor. That's what the scriptural stories about creation and about Noah's Ark are all about. They offer us a spiritual worldview that in the 7th century, St. Maximus the Confessor called a cosmic liturgy, a vision of the world as larger than ourselves and our interests, a spirit of simplicity and sharing. It is about living simply and wasting less. Basically, it's about surrender and sacrifice. And it's not just about not doing certain things, it's also about decisions and actions, about choosing our priorities, as well as about choosing how we live and what we do. The truth is that while we tend to call this an ecological crisis, the root of the problem lies in the paradigms that impel us to pursue a particular lifestyle. The crisis concerns the way we imagine and treat one another and our planet. The way we see or perceive the world defines the way we will respect and respond to it. And it also determines the connections that we will draw between our perspectives and practices. Spiritula.
Thank you, Father John. And again, we are grateful to His All Holiness for his blessing, and really for the panel that is with us tonight, and again to the audience for joining us for our third webinar. So we thank you all for being with us, and We're excited for this evening tonight, and the conversation tonight, as Father John mentioned, will be focusing on communities at work. So before I begin, I would like to just remind the audience that you can use the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen to write any questions you may have throughout the time that the conversation is going. And at the end, we will allow time for questions and answers to be had. So I would now like to introduce our panel. Ms. Karenna Gore is the founder and director of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. The Reverend Fletcher Harper is the executive director of GreenFaith. Mr. Patrick Carolan is the director of Catholic Outreach for Vote Common Good. And Mr. Martin Palmer is the interim chief executive of FaithInvest, and we thank him again for being awake on a different time zone with us tonight. So we are grateful to each of our panelists. And of course, a lot more can be said about the achievements of each person, and we are very honored to have all of them here tonight with us. And you can read more about each person and what they do in the bios document that was attached in the chat below. So make sure to check it out. So let's begin our conversation. Fletcher, I want to ask you the first question to open up our time together. Can you tell us about your work at GreenFaith and your approach to working with parishes?
Sure, and thanks so much for the chance to be together. It's wonderful to be together with longtime colleagues and to be with our Orthodox friends as well. I think there are three themes that we've found that underlie work at the parish level. One is to establish a compelling sense of urgency. The second is to identify people who are interested. And the third is to get them organized around substantive issues. And just to dig a little bit into each of those, it's just fundamental that we recognize at this point in religious communities that we are facing a situation of enormous urgency. That's been true for many decades, but the fact that it's been true for many decades only accentuates the importance of now. And we find that particularly across North America, more and more people know that we're at a point where dramatic and transformational change is needed. And this is a place where clergy, religious leaders, religious educators have a vital role to play in terms of establishing that urgency and really meaning it. Now, the second thing after you do that at a parish-wide level is to be realistic that there are going to be a select number of people within any given parish who really are touched to make a commitment around these areas. The aim is not to get everybody dramatically involved. The aim is to identify the 4 or 5 or 6 people who are called by God to ministry in this area and to bring them together. And the best way to do that, frankly, is if there's a parish-wide event just to raise awareness, if you have a sign-up sheet, the people who sign the sign-up sheet are the people that you pursue to cultivate as your leaders. They don't realize it, but they're putting a nice target on their own backs by signing up. And that's the way this works. So you get them together. And then the final thing is you work on bringing them together to form an identity, to identify local priorities, and to figure out how they, in their particular context, can get to work and make a real difference. And that's work that we do. It's work that Karenna does. It's work that Patrick and Martin do. We all do it in different ways. But I think that pattern of putting it out there at a high level, finding the people who are interested, and then making a commitment to getting them connected to the resources to make a substantial impact is important. So I'll stop there, but I think that's the pattern that we've seen that works.
Yeah, thank you, Fletcher. And I appreciate what you said about the calling that people have to do that ministry too, which I think is so important and leads to my next question for you, Karenna, about the Center for Earth Ethics, which you founded and directed and is located at a seminary where people obviously study for ministry. So I want to ask you if you could tell us briefly about the center and the role that education plays in your work.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, I'm honored and delighted to be here, and very respectful of the work of Martin, Fletcher, and Patrick, and looking forward to learning from what each of them has to say. We started the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Seminary after a large conference called Religions for the Earth, which actually Fletcher, Harper, and GreenFaith were a partner on. And Patrick, Carolan was also there. And so that conference was coming together to reframe climate change as a moral issue and galvanize faith-based activism to confront it. And the sense then in September of 2014, which was before the Paris Agreement, before Pope Francis published Laudato Si, I would note that the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew was a groundbreaking visionary leader who had been voicing a lot of the moral urgency behind the climate crisis. But there was a sense that religions could do more, and that religious leaders could do more. And so many people came together in that way for that work. And essentially the insight is that data and science is not enough. It's important, but we have a lot of it. We already know essentially what we need to do. There are these big mega trends. There's the depletion of the carbon sinks of the world, the forests and the soils and wetlands and so on. And then there is the pollution, the greenhouse gas pollution. And so this really comes down to why we can't make these changes. And that is about belief systems and values. And at the seminary, we're able to give classes. So an example of some classes that we've given are religion and climate change. So that's a basic sort of survey course. Indigenous voices on colonization, spirituality, and ecology, to really look at the role that colonization has played. Some of the ways that religion can and has been used for bad, as well as the ways that it can be used for good. And then beyond GDP, to look at the way that we measure a successful society. And this, I know, relates a lot to the work of my fellow panelists, and particularly probably Martin, thinking about finance and economics and measurements and so on, to really put forward a kind of curriculum where people can study the roots of how we got to the point of this crisis in order to see the way out. So we're able to work on education and then create workshops from those classes that we pilot at Union that can be then disseminated in churches and in other community centers. Thank you.
Thanks, Karenna. I really appreciated the origin part of the education too, because that's so important, and then bringing in the voices of Indigenous people and everything else and also the religious aspect of it. So Patrick, my question next for you is, because part of the education piece also comes then with the mobilization of how we actually put this into action. So you have a lot of experience in mobilizing people to do this action. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about the lessons and best practices you learned from your past and present leadership roles in mobilizing people.
Sure, and I, like Karenna and Fletcher said, I'm very happy to be here. And I'm particularly happy to be on a panel with Karenna and Fletcher because I haven't seen them in a while. So it's good to see them and do work with them again. Sometimes that happens in life as you work together closely and then you sort of spread out and do different things. So it's always good to come back together. Organizing and mobilizing is kind of pretty simple. It's all about relationships and building relationships. Fletcher talked about getting the parishes involved. And one of the steps you have to take when you're doing that is you have to build relationships with each other. It doesn't help. It would never help if I called Karenna up and said, could you work on this with me, if I hadn't first built a relationship with Karenna and spent some time, getting to know her and getting to know each other. And part of that is because in mobilizing and organizing, we have to hold each other accountable as well. And as Fletcher will remember, Fletcher and I kind of helped organize the faith community for the People's Climate March in New York. And, we reached out to lots of people and we had accountability. We said, if you're going to bring 50 people, then bring 50 people. If you tell us you can't only bring 10 people, that's fine. That's all you can bring, but bring 10 people. So a lot of the mobilization is the accountability part of it, but it's also building those one-on-one relationships and spending the time to do one-on-one meetings with people so you get to know each other. Because when you're mobilizing and when you're organizing, and I'm sure that there were times when both Karenna and Fletcher wanted to kill me for stuff that I said or did, but we had a good relationship, so that tension that can come, we were able to work through it and continue working together. That's real critical when you're doing that. And then, I'll tell a little story about, I'm the co-founder of the Global Catholic Climate Movement. So let me share just briefly how that came about, because Karenna is the one responsible for the Global Catholic Climate Movement. She talked about her conference that she had before the People's Climate March. And there were a group of Catholics that came there with myself and Jackie Redmond from Australia, a couple of others. And, first of all, being good Catholics, we attended some of the sessions and then we met at the bar after. But we started talking to each other and building relationships with each other. And then we decided we need to build something. So we started doing Skype calls. This is before Zoom. So we were doing Skype calls. We'd have a Skype call every Tuesday morning or Tuesday evening, depending on what part of the world you were in. Started out with like 6 of us, and we started inviting different people. And before you knew it, we had about 20 people from different parts of the world coming together. And then we started building one-on-one relationships with each other. So we'd do our regular Tuesday morning meeting, and then we'd take time during the week to each of us meet one other person. So we got to know each other, got to understand each other. And from that, we were able to build the Global Catholic Climate Movement. So it really is just about building the relationships, holding each other accountable, and understanding that there's going to be tension because not everybody thinks alike all the time. And when that tension comes, if you're in relationship, you can work through the tension to really to complete the purpose that we set out to do. So it's not complicated.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the simplicity of it. And also, I think it really, to me, reminded me of basic Christian practices too, right? We build relationships and also are accountable to one another and to our Creator first and foremost. So I want to turn it a little bit differently, Martin. You have accountability in a different way, so to speak, and we talked a little bit about finances. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about at FaithInvest, how you focus on different kinds of assets for faith groups that they may have, but also the importance that trust is put in faith communities. So can you tell us about how these two pieces kind of fit together in your work?
Well, first of all, it's a great delight to be with so many Orthodox. I've been working with the Orthodox Church on the environment since 1987 and helped design the first document that the Orthodox Church produced under Patriarch Demetrius, which was the Orthodox response to the ecological crisis, and then spent a lot of time, an awful lot of time on Mount Athos, actually undertaking a complete survey of the mountain on behalf of His All Holiness, and worked closely with him, of course, on the launch, which was actually suggested by His Royal Highness Prince Philip, a previous Orthodox who then got converted to Anglicanism, but I think is still at heart an Orthodox, who suggested that I suggested the Patriarch that we suggest you create a particular day in the calendar, which was September the 1st. My middle name is Giles, so I knew it was St. Giles's Day, and therefore was very able to impress the Holy Synod that Anglicans even knew about saints. So it's a joy to work with the Orthodox Church, particularly with Father John again. I've been working with the Faiths on the Environment for almost 40 years now, and I now work and help work with over 700 different religious organizations around the world, from the Muslims of Indonesia to the Taoists of China to the Thai Buddhist network. I even work with my own church, the Church of England. Now, that's taken a hell of a long time. As Fletcher will know, as a fellow Episcopalian, they're not the easiest group to work with. And really, the problem was very simple. There were two real problems as to how the faiths were hesitant at being involved. First of all, they thought they were just gadflies. They thought that the role of the faiths was simply to buzz around and annoy the governments and the multinationals and the international corporations and so forth. But back in 1997, we did the first ever audit and survey of what the faiths own. And the major faiths of the world, first of all, have between 80 to 85% of the world's population are members. Now, you know, as anybody in a church knows, being a member of a faith isn't necessarily the same as faithfully following all the teachings, but there is a core there of values. And I also am senior advisor to WWF on the Beliefs and Values program around the world, because the faiths are actually harbingers of values. We are the only body in the world that actually has a set of coherent values, rather than values we make up when the proverbial hits the fan. And the second part of that is that we are actually major stakeholders in the planet. we run or own 50% of all schools around the world. We run a third of all universities and almost half of all medical facilities around the world. We own outright 8% of the habitable surface of the forest, 5% of the planet, 5% of commercial forests, and we are the third largest investing group on the planet. So running around pretending that our role is only to be gadflies and protest, actually, I think, can be at times a monumental diversion. We need to actually start saying, before we tell other people what to do, why don't we make sure we're doing it ourselves? Why don't we make sure that we are, as that wonderful project you have in the United States, the Interfaith Power and Light, actually sourcing our energy from sources that are renewable and then feeding it back into the grid? Or in the way that the Swedish Lutheran Church has done, to get every single one of its 5,000 parishes to do an audit and to work out what it's buying, and then to collectively buy organic food and fair trade products. Let's stop faffing around as though what we can do is tell other people what to do and protest when they don't do it. Until we put our own house in order, we're going to end up, as Jesus said, with people who are trying to remove the speck from other people's eyes with a whopping great beam in our own. And perhaps the biggest area where we have yet to live up to our values as faiths, and this isn't just true of Christianity, it's true of every single faith, is in our investments. The faiths have somewhere in the region of $11 to $12 trillion worth of investments. We are 14 to 15% as institutions of the entire investment world. If you add into that the number of faithful who are investors, we can actually affect somewhere in the region of 40% of all investments. And as we know from the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals in the UN, that's only going to happen because business puts the money into making change. Well, we are one of the biggest investors in business in the world. And so FaithInvest exists in order to help the faiths live and invest faith consistently. Our goal is to move up to 60% of all faith investments within 10 years into sustainable and environmental investment. And that can be done. We've already shifted just under $1.5 trillion. But the other thing I want to add, and Karenna touched on this, I could feed you with masses of statistics and data, but they bore me rigid. We are a storytelling species. We are a narrative species. So let us stop trying to out-numerate the rest of the world. The numbers are called numbers because they numb us. Let's tell our stories. And let's tell stories, the kind of stories that Fletcher can tell, that Karenna can tell, that Patrick can tell, that I can tell, about what is actually being done with integrity. And what we say to the faith investors who've been quite good in the disinvestment world, quite good in the sort of, sin bins, what we won't invest in. We say to them, well, we know what you're against. And maybe this is the fundamental parish question. We know what you're against. What are you for?
Thank you, Martin. I like the last question of what are you for? And thinking from the top level of investment, sometimes you don't think about that. So I appreciate that perspective. And Patrick, I want to turn to you next because what Martin kind of mentioned too is this moral systems that faiths have. And so 5 years ago already, Laudato Si was published. And I would love if you can tell us a little bit more about in those 5 years, what have Catholic parishes been doing for creation care to kind of put these moral values and systems into action in our daily lives and in our parishes?
Well, I can tell you real quickly, not enough. And in a lot of cases, nothing. Laudato Si, I think, was one of the most profound documents written in my lifetime. And yet I would wager that probably less than 40% of Catholics in the US actually have a clue as to what Laudato Si says. And it's probably less than half of the parishes even talk about it at all anymore. And even after it first came out, and I spent a lot of time in Rome meeting with Cardinal Turkson and others and planning on how we're going to get Laudato Si out there. and yet it was kind of ignored by a good portion of the US Catholic Church. That's not true about Catholic Church in South America and other places where Laudato Si is part of their teachings. But in the US, it's not. And part of that reason is that Laudato Si challenges our theology, and it challenges it in a big way. And most Catholics, and probably most Christians, aren't really that interested in having their theology challenged. And so, Laudato Si is based on the teachings of St. Francis. And St. Francis really taught us that we should all be, we're all connected, the intersectionality of all of us, in each of us. And that it's all about, are we in right relationship with creation? Not are we here to care for creation or to have dominance over creation, but to be in right relationship with creation. And so until we as a people of faith rethink our theology and start getting back to a theology that St. Francis of Assisi taught us, and the theology of Jesus, not the theology of Plato or Aristotle, until we get back to that, then, Laudato Si is nice, sits in the offices, a lot of parishes. Some parishes have built Laudato Si committees, and they still have 5 or 6 people that meet regularly to talk about it. But it hasn't had any major impact on the US Catholic Church. And even in the Bishops' Conference, they don't even mention Laudato Si anymore. When they have their meetings, when it comes up, some bishops will talk about it and how we have to really start promoting this, and it gets shot down. So it's unfortunate, but that's the truth of it.
Thank you for that. And it's just, I'm hearing this like constant, we experience this too in the Orthodox Church, and I'm sure in many other traditions, this tension of this is fantastic and this is what our theology says, but the reality of it takes the next step of us actually doing the work and really being challenged in that way. And I think kind of in the same vein of that challenge is environmental justice. So Karenna, I want to invite you in the next part to tell us a little bit more about how the Center for Earth Ethics focuses on environmental justice, and if you can give us some examples of what this means and how it relates to creation care. Oh, Karenna, I think you're still muted. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, I think that for Christian communities, the teaching "Love thy neighbor as thyself" is central, and this is also a very important guidepost to greening our faith communities, because we can see that the impacts of the climate crisis are most felt by the poor and marginalized. We've seen that in many cases with the stronger storms and the droughts, those that don't have the means to flee or rebuild, those that live closest to the land, and so on. But it's also true that on the front end of the climate crisis, in some ways, you just think of it simple cause and effect. We have the effects, but we have to look at the level of cause, which is where that depletion and that pollution happens. And the main activity that drives the climate crisis, the combustion of fossil fuels, also creates local pollution, air pollution, largely, that harms people's health. And so we can see that in the United States, there is environmental racism at work in where these sites are located. The number one indicator of the placement of a toxic facility in this country is the race of the people that live nearby. And so one way to think about the role of environmental justice in creation care is to recognize that if we truly were loving our neighbors as ourselves, we would never have allowed them to be living in a situation where there is what has been termed slow violence, the kinds of health effects from toxins that result in cancer and asthma and suffering and death. If we had been taking care of our neighbors as ourselves all of this time, we would not have jeopardized the health of the whole, because these projects wouldn't have gone forward. And so environmental justice is very important to creation care in that way. And some examples that I've been involved in, we have a senior fellow at the Center for Earth Ethics who is from rural Alabama. And we went to rural Alabama, to her community, to have a workshop that was dealing with issues of water and sanitation, inadequate access to water and sanitation, and trying to meet with communities, to including faith leaders, to galvanize action to really put attention on solving that issue. There was also an issue of coal ash. So we all know that one of the ways we got in this mess is this false notion of externalities, right? That there are things that we can say that pollution doesn't count because it's seen as an externality to a business plan. So the externality, coal ash, is something that that comes out of obviously the burning, the extraction and burning of coal, and it harms people's health there. So another example from that workshop was actually coming together, having faith leaders and faith communities draw attention, educate themselves, and then advocate. And that takes many forms. It can be sermons. We all know the power of that, and how that can reach people and move people to act in their own ways. It can be letter writing. It can be speaking around dinner tables, and so on. So those are some examples of the way that environmental justice functions in the work of the center.
Thank you for that. And especially the emphasis and the reality of this affects everyone, and also the injustices that the pollution and factors that you're saying is just, it's not right and wrong. So thank you for bringing that even further to our attention. But also, Martin, I want to invite you now to speak about, obviously we all live on this planet in our different faith communities, maybe have different creeds or things that we profess. So from your work, it would be great if you can tell us about the practices that you've learned from other faiths, such as Taoist or Buddhist, Muslims, and other faith groups, and what actions they are doing and what you see as possible for care and for creation.
Thank you. I think one of the most important things is that every faith knows how to celebrate. Because I quite often ask, and I've worked with all the major environmental groups in the world, I often ask them, have you ever produced a joke book? Or a song book? And the answer is no, they never have. Because there is a bit of a sort of puritanical streak sometimes in the environmental movement. And faiths know, every faith knows, you can ask people to fast for a time, and then you party. And that basic wisdom about asking people to live more simply in order that they can then appreciate how much fun it is to have a really wild weekend, or possibly even a week, particularly if it's a Hindu festival, is very important. If we're just asking people to lock down, and I'm in one at the moment, we can't go out, we can't move, we can't visit family or friends, then when that goes, you appreciate what you have and you value it even more. And every major faith, we started with the Orthodox Church, with September the 1st. That was the first ever festival day within a faith. And within a very short period of time, not least because Metropolitan John of Pergamon went around the world telling everybody else what a great idea it was, we had similar ones with the Sikhs, with the Hindus, with the Taoists, with the Buddhists, with the Muslims, and so forth. So, and actually the first one after the patriarch was the Jewish community. So part of it is this whole thing of actually letting people feel it's something that they're actually involved with, something they can really make a difference on, that doesn't demand that they make some huge change initially. The way that Fletcher was talking about, you build up a community of those of the willing, and then you find something they can do. And it doesn't matter if it's very small. Greta has taught us that. It's a matter of whether it can be achieved. So there's that. The second part, I think, is re-sacralizing the planet. The Orthodox Church is very good at seeing the planet as sacred. The Protestant churches killed that as something that they felt was paganism, frankly, in the Reformation and so forth. So a lot of work that we've done is to revitalize sacred mountains in China, for example, or revitalize sacred lakes in Indonesia, or in my own country, revitalize pilgrimage routes. Put people back in touch with the land, get them to walk, get them to look at what they don't normally see, the things that have gone, the things that have been destroyed, the things that have been lost. And we've created a ceremony of ringing the death knell to account for the species that have been made extinct in the last 10 years, and mourning. So actually using the rituals that we have, which take us deeper into not just telling everybody what they shouldn't do, but mourning and then repenting and moving from that into action. And the final thing is, and it's one of my favorite stories, is that back in 1987, 88, we were working with the Thai Buddhists in Thailand, where there was a massive problem with deforestation. And we were talking with them saying, well, what is there in your tradition that could help save the forests? And they kind of sat there and they thought, and they said, oh, well, actually in the Lotus Sutra, which is this beautiful, beautiful text about salvation in the Buddhist tradition, it does say that if in order to stop any creature, any element of the planet from suffering, the Buddha could appear, and I apologize for this, it is 2,500 years old, as a woman, or as a Brahmin, which is a Hindu, or as a dog, or as a tree. And so building on that, we said, well, what if the Buddha had come back as the trees that are being cut down? They said, no, we couldn't do that. But what we could do is we could ordain the trees as monks. And so now one of the biggest conservation projects in Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Burma, Myanmar, is the monks going into the forests, ordaining trees, and that then creates a sacred penumbra. And that has protected so far something like 4,500 community forests from being felled. So it's taking what we've got and giving it a new meaning and purpose.
Thank you, Warren. That's a good point. We have all these beautiful traditions, and then, as your theme was saying too, putting stake into what we have and really making it our own and celebrating that and being human within that as well. Fletcher, I want to invite you in this kind of same idea of really owning it and having this impact even on a local level. Is what way you think parishes can make their greatest impact on climate change? This is what we're talking about and really the center of our discussion.
I think there are three interrelated realms of activity, I think, that have, from my perspective, from GreenFaith's perspective, sort of equal importance. One is people can look at the way they themselves live, their own lifestyles, how they adopt a more sort of climate-friendly, environment-friendly lifestyle, and that, that focuses around diet, it focuses around transportation, and it focuses around how you power your home. And so there are wonderful examples and resources out there that help people of different faiths, as well as people of uncertain or no faith, that have moved towards the delicious plant-based diet that connects with local farmers, and that's sort of good. There are a growing number of opportunities around the world for people to purchase their electricity supply or the equivalent thereof from small, emerging, local renewable energy projects, which again is wonderful. Travel is hard. You can bike in certain areas. The US is terrible in most places on access to biking, but that's something that is important. So anyway, individual lifestyle is one piece of the picture. Second piece of the picture is institutional, and several things have been said already about what religious institutions can do to offer leadership. They can adopt dietary policies for their schools, for their parishes, for so on and so forth. I was a parish priest for 10 years, and every Earth Day we would do a tasting of different fair trade organic coffees, because that was a fun way to get people engaged. They can start to use 100% renewable energy themselves. They can conserve energy. They can align, if they have an investment portfolio, they can look to align those investments with their own values, and they can get involved. And this sort of transitions into the third area of activity, which is really working for systemic change, using the power of religion, its cultural power, its moral power, to shift and to make an impact on really important local decisions. So we organize GreenFaith circles in different communities and congregations on this. We've got them in about 15 countries at this point. It's a very grassroots approach to this. And what we see, for example, to use a couple of US examples, in Tampa, Florida, the circle there has come together with other environmental groups in the community to educate and encourage and pressure the city to make a 100% renewable energy commitment. And the vote for that at the city council is coming up in about a month and a half. In northern New Jersey, there were plans to install or to create a new natural gas power plant. Our circle there came together with other climate and environmental groups, pressured the government, pressured the governor, engaged in some pretty tough negotiations with other key stakeholders. A decision was made based on the collective pressure not to do a natural gas plant, which was going to lock in carbon emissions for 40 to 50 more years, but instead to build a storage facility, a massive storage facility for electricity, which would then help power the local transit authorities, trains and buses renewably. So, you know, there's the individual level, the institutional and the systemic. There are three interlocking gears. They all need to be moving, and they all need to be moving fast. And you need sort of a local, you know, faith groups are most influential at the local level from our perspective. The high level statements are vitally important, as is the witness and leadership of high level faith leaders, but alone, as we all know, that's insufficient. And so you need this local capacity to engage on these issues and to make a real impact.
Thank you, Fletcher. And I appreciate the intersectionality as we're continuing to talk about, because really, as you're saying, the institutional, all these other pieces, the grassroots is also important. And this other pillar that we've mentioned briefly, and Karenna, I want to invite you to speak on this, is the education piece too, and how the education then motivates us to go into action. So Karenna, if you could tell us about some of your seminary students and how beyond the classroom, you really invite your students to engage with their communities, as Fletcher was speaking, on the local level, because we know how important that is to really put those practices they're learning into action. Oh, Karenna, you're muted again. I'm sorry.
So sorry. I thank you very much. I've been thinking about what the other panelists have said, and one of the things I've been thinking about is that reconnection to land and to nature, and how important that is, and how inspiring Orthodox teachings and culture is on that. I completely agree. The concept of beauty is really a very serious concept that I think other faith traditions would do well to take as seriously as many Orthodox do. And I think of that teaching, ancient Orthodox, that the whole earth is a living icon of the face of God, and how powerful that is. And in answer to your question, one of the classes I didn't mention before that we taught a couple years in a row was called Plant Wisdom. So the idea with that, first we called it Plant Wisdom and Interreligious Dialogue, and really focused on indigenous teachings and indigenous wisdom. And then we called it Plant Wisdom and Ecological Consciousness. But the idea was to turn the classroom inside out and really take students studying for ministry out into the forest to really put into practice seeing the plants and the trees growing around as medicines, as relatives, the interconnected beauty, the cosmic liturgy that Father John mentioned before, and so on. And that was a really wonderful experience. And we've had students go on from that to incorporate it into their work in various ways. The whole concept of ministry in this time, when the pressing moral issue is to reconcile humanity to the whole rest of the natural world. There's so many exciting opportunities to do that. As Martin mentioned, pilgrimage routes. One way that we've done it, because we're in Manhattan, is to really connect to the river. So the Hudson River runs by Union, and we've done water ceremonies there, different ways of experimenting with water. Again, I would say this is an area where the Ecumenical Patriarch has spoken in such a beautiful way. We all know that Indigenous voices have provided incredible moral leadership here in speaking about water is life, water protectors, the Standing Rock conflict against the Dakota Access Pipeline was a real nexus point. We were able to facilitate some students, some seminarians going out to Standing Rock and being part of solidarity with the Native people who were water protectors, and then bringing that back into the seminary to talk about that. The reason I thought of the Ecumenical Patriarch is because I was recently reading where he had written against and spoken about the commodification of water that's going on now, the privatization. Even in the face of this depletion, there's this push to privatize, and said, this is as sacred as the blood flowing in a body. And that's an example of a beautiful insight from the Orthodox tradition. It's a different way of saying it than we heard from Native people saying, Mini Wachoni, water is life. But all of these are powerful, powerful teachings, and they really are of the essence of the change that we need. So just to wrap up and answer to your question, we've been able to have students go out into the field that way, whether it's to Standing Rock, whether it's to local sites, whether it's down to the Hudson River, to practice applying sacred texts and teachings, ritual and ceremony, to think about topics like ecological grief and anxiety, and how that is incorporated into pastoral care, and so on. And I find that there's a real appetite for this among seminary students, but also amazingly among even people who view themselves as secular. There are so many people who are hungry for a way to access the deep spiritual and ethical teachings that really are a treasure of our faith traditions. And so I think one opportunity is for us to find a way to do that and offer it to the world, because it is so needed.
Thanks, Karenna. I am just imagining going down to the Hudson and but really looking at it from a different perspective, right? There is still beauty, even though sometimes we say it might be very dirty, or what it may be, but there is beauty in everything around us, no matter what that may look like. And to kind of going off this beauty and Martin, what you spoke about before of celebration and this joy that also comes with that, I would love for you to go even deeper into this role of celebration as a tool to every faith tradition to raise awareness and increase action again, and what other tools might do something similar in addition to celebration.
Well, thank you. Yes, I think everybody likes a party. Everybody likes to do something that's fun. It's far more exciting than being told what you can't do. And we've taken that into the investment world by trying in a sense to say, look, you've often been told off for the fact that you've actually screwed up the planet fairly monumentally by the way you've run business and run economics. However, you also have the chance of changing and of repentance, if you like, of moving through. And so part of what we do with the major faith investment groups is to say, what is it you're proud of? What is it you actually want to tell the world about because it's so bloody good? They ought to know. And very often you are met by blank looks of complete incomprehension. Most finance officers have never been asked about what they would celebrate. But by saying to them that maybe what they're doing is worthwhile, is valuable, is important, you motivate them to do something more. But I think the great thing about the celebrations is, and this was the brilliance of the Holy Synod in the Fanar, when they agreed to create the first day of the environment, was that they would build around it new liturgies. We had a wonderful reading from Father John of one of those prayers. They built around it a whole education program. I remember us also having an amazingly funny conversation on Patmos about the idea of linking sins and repentance and forgiveness for sins to tree planting, and trying to match particular tree species with particular sins. If you get bored of an evening, try, it's very entertaining. But that idea that in a sense, we have things in our traditions, we have rituals for births, for marriages, for deaths, for our big periods in the life. We have our annual cycle. We are a species that thinks that time is linear and we live it cyclically. And all these things, the faiths know, we keep a cycle of the year. We come back to the same theme because you can't tell everybody that you've crucified the Lord every single day. You've also got to celebrate his birth. You've got to celebrate when he had a ascension and so on. So it's the variety of narrative that we tell. But that idea of a celebration, we helped create 11 years ago a movement called Eco-Sikh, which is the biggest Sikh environment movement in the world. Very powerful in India, very powerful in the States. And they created Sikh Environment Day, which is the 14th of March. And they started the first of those in 2011. 3 years ago, I was with a group of young Sikh people, men and women, in the Punjab, and they were talking about Eco-Sikh and what they were planning to do. And I said, isn't it wonderful? I mean, it's only been going for 6 or 7 years. And they looked at me as though I was some kind of idiot. And they said, no, we've always done Eco-Sikh. When you can embed something so it comes as natural that you do it, you've succeeded. When you have to constantly remind people that they ought to do it, you maybe haven't got the right educational tool. So a celebration is an opportunity, usually for the month before and the month after, to focus. And in focusing, exactly as Fletcher was saying, to do things like enjoying the different kinds of coffees from fair trade. So there's that. And I think the final thing I would say about celebration, we helped create with the Methodists in the UK, the first ethical hotel in the UK. How did we do that? We did that because we used to use the Methodists when we were having meetings in London because they were cheap, jolly and friendly. And one day we were sitting at breakfast and my wife, Victoria, said to the head of it, are these eggs organic? And the manager went, oh, no, they're far too expensive and nobody wants them. We said, no, but you're Christians. How can you possibly not have organic eggs? Asking that one question led to a complete review of their purchasing policy, led them to get investment from the Methodist Church of £7.5 million to rebuild the place entirely ethically, energy from geothermal. And not only were they successful in changing their own purchasing policy, so successful were they that the Quakers, the Anglicans, the others all said, oh, can we buy from you? They now are the largest single organic farm producing and selling organization in the whole of London. So by sometimes asking the right question and then following through the corollary of the action and telling people that you've done it and isn't it great, you can accidentally spread it like a virus. Oh, possibly not the best image.
Thank you, Martin. I appreciate the small changes that might be possible. And Fletcher, I want to invite you briefly to mention, sometimes it might seem difficult of where to start. So if you could tell us about some opportunities that are upcoming that parishes can get involved with GreenFaith to really be more involved in their local communities.
Sure. March 11th, with colleagues from 14 different multi-faith colleagues from 14 different countries around the world, there will be a multi-faith climate day of action when churches will ring their bells, synagogues blow the shofar, Buddhist temples sound the gongs, all to express a sense of deep reverence and care for the earth and all people, and to say, let's get to work more than ever before protecting and cherishing it. And people can go to greenfaith.org to learn more about that. And they can email me at fletcher@greenfaith.org. We have so far about 400 sites around the world that have signed up for the day. And it's a good way to get started. And it can also be done in a way that is very safe in the midst of the pandemic, because it can be done virtually as well as by individuals or just two people going to a specific site to do something.
Awesome. Thank you. And we'll definitely make that available on our resource page as well. And Patrick, I want to invite you to talk a little bit about the individual lifestyle changes, for the small changes that might seem small that don't matter, but it actually does matter, what those may be.
Sure. And first of all, let me just say that, one of the first things we have to change in talking about lifestyle changes, we often talk about we're faith communities, but we're not really communities. And so the first thing we have to do is really start to be communities again. We have to stop being buildings where people go on Sunday or Saturday and spend an hour or so and get back to the way we were in the 2nd and 3rd century where we were communities. And, there's a lot of things that you can do, individuals. Right now in the month of January, there is a whole program to be a vegan. People are taking a 30-day pledge to be a vegan. It's easy for me. I'm a vegetarian, so I was about 85% vegan already. So, but for folks, you can do stuff like that. You can giving up meat 2 days a week, 1 day a week. But we try this with the Global Catholic Climate Movement because Meatless Fridays is in our DNA as Catholics. And we try to go back to Meatless Fridays again. Another thing is think about how we can really be a community and how we can start sharing things as opposed to everybody buying all their own. We have a whole program out there on carpooling to work. And so, you can sign up and you can carpool to work. How about neighbors getting together and carpool to go grocery shopping? Getting 3 neighbors to go and say, let's all go together, and drive together and go grocery shopping together or go to church together. Several years ago, I decided to build a garden in my backyard. So I went out and I bought a tiller, a small tiller, so I could turn my soil over. And then my brother-in-law wanted to start a garden, so I let him use it. And then my neighbor wanted it. Then I put a notice in our church bulletin. And I said, I have a tiller. If anybody wants to start a garden, feel free to use my tiller. And I had 30 different people in my parish ask if they could borrow my tiller instead of them going out. And most of them said I was going to go out and buy one, but now I can just use yours. So it's simple things like that, which is about being part of a community. That's what we do when we're part of a community and just all working together as a community. So we have to start thinking back to that we're a community again, not we're going to church on Sunday.
Thank you, Patrick. I think that's a really beautiful image. That's true. Together we can do something. And if we're just individuals, it's a little bit more difficult. And really, we are called to be in communion with one another and to kind of grow in that way. I want to make sure we're running out of time, but I do want to ask one question at least from the audience. So I would invite just the panelists to unmute themselves and you can chime in. But the question that we have is, what experience can you share concerning your interactions with elected officials and government bodies? So just invite each of you to go off mute and just briefly share your comments on that question.
Patrick, haven't you been doing a whole lot of that?
Oh, Patrick.
Unmute.
I thought you could all read lips. I actually was one of the leaders of the Catholics for Biden committee that organized that, and we organized a whole group of Catholics in Georgia. So I think that it's important to have that. There's another question that we can put into this about how we feel about the new office of climate that's John Kerry is going to be heading up. John Kerry is a good Catholic. I think it's incumbent upon us as people of faith, as communities of faith, to take the time to meet with our elected officials, even at the local level. They don't have to be congresspeople and senators, your state representative, your local congressperson, and let them know how you feel. A lot of these people you see in church on Sunday, let them know how you feel. Let them know that you are a person of faith and you are a strong advocate for climate. Don't be afraid to go up and approach them. They work for you. Most of these people, a lot of them have good intentions, but they want to stay in office. And so they'll react if you talk to them and they know you're a voter and they know that this is an important issue. And if you get 6 or 7 people, particularly with local officials, you get 6 or 7 people from your community to talk to a local official, they'll think there's a landslide of support out there.
Thank you, Patrick. And thank you to, oh, go ahead, Martin.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things that we found most effective is simply to remind elected officials what percentage of their constituency are members of faiths. And that usually is quite a revelation to them. And secondly, you don't even have to get necessarily those people to do anything. Just the fact that they might not vote for them next time round can be quite powerful. So again, I think as stakeholders, we need to remember that one of our major stakeholding skills, and you are exercising it at the moment in the most dramatic way, is our right to vote and to change and to show that our values will actually drive our votes. And if those values are quite openly being reconfigured towards values that are perhaps lain rather hidden in our traditions, but are now becoming more vigorous, that is a very powerful tool.
Thank you. Thank you to each of you. I know we're out of time, unfortunately, and there's some more questions that were left, but we have all the questions, and we will make sure that if you have a direct question to a panelist, we will get in touch with you so you can ask it and get it answered. So again, I want to thank our panel. It was really an honor to be with all of you tonight in this conversation. Thank you to our audience for being with us and all those that will be viewing later the recordings. I just want to remind the audience that when you X out, there'll be a very brief survey. If you can please fill it out, that would be very helpful for us to know what you liked about the evening, what you would like further in the future to be said or to happen. So we really appreciate that. And tomorrow, if you are able to join us, is our last webinar at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And it's called Hopeful Aspirations. And we will be featuring Orthodox Christian young adults and their passion for environmental sustainability and their vision for our parishes and our future here in the United States and beyond. We also are really honored tomorrow to have a brief message from Dr. Jane Goodall that is recorded and will be shared in the beginning. So if you can join us, please do so. It's the same registration link, and we would love to see you tomorrow evening. So thank you again to our panel. Thank you all for your ministry, for your wisdom, for your work. And we're really grateful again, and we're looking forward to seeing everyone again tomorrow. So thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.